Chapter 1. The Key. Leo, an archivist who believed only in ink and parchment, took the key. It was iron, heavy as a manacle, and cold with the damp of the sea cliffs. The caretaker, a gnarled man named Finn, whose eyes were the color of the churning ocean, pushed it into his hand. "The Abbey of St. Jude is a quiet place," Finn rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. "The books, though, they're hungry readers." Leo offered a tight, dismissive smile and turned to the great oak door. As he fitted the key, the wind howled a mournful note. The door swung inward on a groan of ancient hinges, revealing a profound darkness that smelled of dust, decay, and cold, silent knowledge. The library was a perfect circle, a scriptorium. Bookshelves soared 3 stories high, curving away into an upper gloom where the light from the single, grime-caked oculus in the ceiling could not reach. The silence was a physical weight. It was absolute, broken only by the sound of his own breathing. He set up a small workspace at a heavy wooden table in the center, the single island in a sea of forgotten words. After lighting a candle, he ran his fingers along the spines of the nearest shelf. They were all bound in plain, unmarked leather. He chose one at random. It was surprisingly light and felt strangely warm to the touch. Chapter 2. The First Reading. He opened the book to begin the work of cataloging. The script was an elegant, unfamiliar hand, and the ink was a strange, rusty brown. The text described a city of glass spires under a sunless sky. He told himself he would only read the first page to get a feel for the contents, but the prose was hypnotic, the sentences coiling around his thoughts like smoke. He read of the silent inhabitants of the glass city, of their sorrow and their secrets. When a sudden chill made him look up, he was shocked to see the library was in near total darkness. His candle had burned down to a stub. The entire day had vanished. He felt a strange emptiness, a nagging sense that he had forgotten something important. The next morning, he couldn't remember what he'd had for dinner, or if he'd eaten at all. He shook his head, blaming the disorienting quiet and the long journey. As he worked, he found himself humming a tune. It was a simple, sad melody, but he had no idea where he had learned it. He reached into his satchel for the lunch he'd packed and found only a dry crust of bread. He could have sworn he'd packed cheese and an apple. The gaps were small, trivial, but they felt like loose threads in the tapestry of his mind. Chapter 3. The Blank Spaces. After a week, the threads were unraveling. He was cataloging a book of sea charts when he pulled his wallet out for a moment of distraction. Tucked behind his identification was a small, worn photograph of a smiling woman with kind eyes standing under a blossoming cherry tree. He stared at it, his heart beginning to pound. He knew with a dreadful certainty that this woman was important. He knew he was supposed to feel a great wave of love and warmth. Instead, there was nothing, only a cold, terrifying, blank space where her name and her memory should have been. The silence of the library was no longer empty. It was filled with faint noises just at the edge of his hearing. The whisper-soft rustle of a page turning in a distant, darkened aisle. A soft, dry sigh that seemed to come from the shelves right behind him. He spun around, his lamp casting wild shadows. "Is anyone there?" he shouted, his voice cracking. The only reply was the echo of his own words, thrown back at him from the circular walls. The voice that returned sounded like a stranger's.
Chapter 4. The Archivist's Ghost. He began a frantic search, no longer for knowledge, but for an answer. He ran his hands along the shelves, the walls, the floor. Behind a row of identical-looking books, his fingers found a loose stone. Prying it open, he discovered a small, hidden cavity. Inside was another book, a small, tattered journal. It was the log of the archivist who had come before him. The first entries were neat, methodical, but they grew frantic, the handwriting devolving into a panicked scrawl. "The ink drinks the mind," one entry read. "The vellum is hungry." The final entry, dated 50 years prior, was a single shaky sentence. "I do not remember my own name." That was enough. He had to get out. He scrambled to his feet, stuffing the journal into his coat, and ran for the great oak door, the exit into the real world. He fumbled in his pocket for the heavy iron key. It wasn't there. He checked his other pockets, his satchel, his room. It was gone. A cold dread washed over him. He was locked in. He threw his shoulder against the door, then pounded with his fists, his shouts for help swallowed by the immense, indifferent silence of the stone and wood. From the library behind him, the whispering grew louder, weaving his name into a soft, inviting chorus. Leo!
Chapter 5. The Final Volume. Defeated, he turned back to the scriptorium. The whispers drew him toward the center of the room, to the heavy lectern. Upon it sat a single large book that he swore had not been there before. It was bound in a pale, smooth material that was not quite leather. The whispers coalesced into a single, soothing voice that seemed to emanate from the book itself. It promised him everything: the name of the woman, the memory of the sun on his face, his life returned to him. All he had to do was read one last story. He knew it was a lie, a trap, but the emptiness inside him was an agony he could no longer bear. Trembling, he reached out and opened the book. The first line on the page read, "Leo, an archivist who believed only in ink and parchment, took the key." He read the story of his own life, his journey to the abbey, his work, his growing fear, his discovery of the photograph. It was all there. But as his eyes moved from left to right, the ink of the words he had just read began to fade, the rusty brown script vanishing into the pale, hungry page. With every disappearing word, he felt the corresponding memory dissolve from his mind like mist. He read faster, desperate to reach the end, yet with every sentence he became more of a stranger to himself. He read the final word on the final page. The ink vanished. He looked up from the now blank book, his eyes empty, his mind a perfect, silent page ready for a new story to be written.